You guys ever just miss being a kid?
We are seeing a lot more of this.
Over the last month, the Labor Department has fined multiple companies for violating child labor laws.
Cocoa used by candy giant Mars is harvested by impoverished children in Africa.
Laboring in the blistering heat here as young as 6, and big corporations make promises they seldom keep.
In Indonesia, Aymar helped harvest the fruit that makes its way into products sold by leading Western food and cosmetics brands. She sometimes works 12 hours a day, barefooted and with no gloves on.
This video is gonna be a major deep dive, but it's actually one of my most requested videos from you guys on my channel. I'm gonna be talking about unethical labor practices and forced slavery within the cosmetics industry, and specifically the skincare industry. I know it's a heavy topic, it's gonna get really deep, which is why it's all the more important that you get out your skincare products and practice some self-care while we talk about this very dark topic. But before we get into it, I do want to give a trigger warning. I'm not going to get too graphic with what I'm talking about, but we are covering very sensitive topics about slavery, children, deceptive business practices, and just overall some pretty awful topics that aren't fun to talk about, but need to be talked about. Don't worry, I'm gonna try to keep it as light as possible, but this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and I've actually had experience working with in the past with a nonprofit organization I used to work for. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how forced labor is utilized in the cosmetics industry, give examples of ingredients and regions where this is common, even stories of people who have gone through this, talk about the complexity of this issue and why no one person is at fault, and also the difficulties of getting to a point where the cosmetics industry and just the world in general no longer uses unethical labor, and also some solutions and opinions I have on how we can actually fix this problem. So strap in, this is gonna be a long one, but I can promise you that by the end of this video, you are going to learn so much more, be so much more empowered as a consumer to make a positive difference in the world. As usual, all the products that I'm gonna be talking about in today's video will be linked in the description box below. If you do want to support my channel, I would really appreciate it. And let's jump into it. Okay, so I'm gonna jump right into my skincare routine. I have a bunch of new products that I'm really excited to try. I'm first gonna go in with a face mask, and I'm so mad at myself because yesterday I was like, ooh, I'm gonna use a good deep exfoliating face mask, get some dramatic results, and then my dumbass exfoliated my skin last night. Think, Hyram, think. So for the safety of my skin, I'm not going to. I'm instead going to go in with this soothing gel mask from Thank You Farmer. I really haven't used a lot of Thank You Farmer products because a lot of them do include fragrance, but this one is formulated for sensitive skin and is fragrance free. Ooh, she's pretty. I did already cleanse myself with the Selfless by Hyram Centella and Green Tea Cleanser, just a great way to gently cleanse my skin. I actually think this is a good idea because I don't know if I'm still sick or something, but this morning I woke up so exhausted, and before I could do my skincare routine, I fell right back asleep on my couch. Guess where? In direct sunlight with an exfoliating serum on from last night. So my skin is very mad at me. I think I need a little bit of soothing action. Okay, so I could talk for days about this topic. It is honestly such a huge animal to tackle, and there's so many different facets that I could deep dive into. Like, this is something I'm super passionate about, but I'm just gonna go very top line with you guys. Look at me with the corporate talk. So I'll dive into this more later, but I do want to briefly talk about my experience in this field. I by no means am an expert when it comes to research around forced labor and unethical labor within the cosmetics industry, let alone any industry. I have in the past, however, worked with a nonprofit organization that specifically focused on awareness and rehabilitation efforts for child laborers within the cacao industry. I worked with the founder of the nonprofit, who was previously a child laborer, and through that experience I was able to learn a lot about this issue and how deeply stemmed it is in every single industry. And since then I've created my own brand, Selfless by Hyram, where a lot of what I learned was implemented in our efforts to create the most ethical products possible. But again, I'll talk more about my experience later. Let's just first unpack what the problem of unethical labor and forced labor is within the cosmetics industry. So when you look at any skincare product and you turn it around, you will see a long list of a bunch of gibberish names that you probably have no idea what they mean, reflecting the ingredients in the product. And depending on what brand you're buying from, a lot of these ingredients can be naturally sourced, meaning these ingredients weren't created by a manufacturer or in a lab, but were actually farmed or sourced from natural regions. And it's actually estimated that around 30% of ingredients found in cosmetic products are derived from mined or agricultural commodities. commodities. And I would say skincare represents a big chunk of that because, you know, skincare brands, they're always touting when they have natural ingredients or claiming that even all of their ingredients are naturally sourced. Now, in the late stage capitalism world that we live in, we are automatically drawn to any products that claim to be more natural rather than synthetic because I think for us it represents safety, familiarity, and this concept that, well, if it's from the earth, then it must be better for us. And I mean, I've already talked so much on my channel about how natural is not better, which of course I'm referring to the actual performance of the ingredients on the face and whether or not they're actually healthy for your skin. But I haven't talked about how the usage of natural ingredients can actually be the source of unethical practices and forced labor practices. Now, think about it. I would say every skincare product that I see has an average of around, 10 to 15 natural ingredients. Now, these ingredients don't come from your local farmer's market. Every single ingredient comes from a different region of the world with its own sourcing, mining, or agricultural process. And because of this, using natural ingredients automatically makes the process of understanding what happens all the way down the chain, all the way from the skincare CEO down to the individual farmer, very murky, very complicated, and not transparent at all. Because when it comes to synthetic ingredients, they are typically created within labs. These ingredients are made by chemists. A lot of times the actual ingredient or the components of the ingredients can be created within a lab or a manufacturing facility without any need for farming or mining. If an ingredient says it's naturally sourced, that means at some point down the production line, it had to be farmed or mined, right? Simple enough. Well, that's about the only simple thing you'll hear in this entire video. So let's first talk about the problem on the ground within these communities where these ingredients are from. With any naturally ingredient sourced, and I'm talking any, there's always going to be a risk that unethical labor or forced labor or even child labor is utilized in the production of that ingredient. And I want to go through some popular examples that are typically utilized in skincare products. The first, and I would say the most popular one, is mica. Mica is a stone that is mined and is predominantly used in makeup products, but also skincare products and even technology, automobiles. So many different industries use mica. Because it's pretty, it gives that beautiful, like, shimmery effect to makeup. It gives a gorgeous, radiant appearance to any skincare products. But actually 87% of the world's mica is mined in Madagascar, which is a giant island country located off the shores of Southeast Africa. Now, regions of Madagascar are considered to be very impoverished, where people really struggle to create an income for themselves and have secure housing, food, water. Now, the US Department of Labor estimates that at least 10,000 children as young as 4 years old are used in the mining process for mica. And if I have learned anything about estimates, research, or studies about forced labor, these numbers tend to be extremely conservative. So I would automatically venture to guess that there are significantly more children in forced labor for mica. Now, I want to paint a picture of what this forced labor looks like because it is bleak and absolutely horrific. Typically, these children will be working long work days, anywhere from 10 to 16 hours with very little breaks. They have a lack of access to food or water during their work hours, let alone outside of their work hours. They face extreme muscle issues from the harsh conditions of working in the mines, oftentimes that will disable them while they're young or lead to a significantly less quality of life when they're adults. They have respiratory issues from breathing in the mica because it's a very fine powder that when ingested into the lungs can cause long-term respiratory problems. There's threats of physical harm from mine owners or adult employees of the mines. Many times they don't have the opportunity to pursue an education and they don't have adequate family support because a lot of times their families are also laborers as well, or many times they are orphans. And depending on the individual, there's either very little pay or absolutely no pay for the labor that they're providing. It's textbook exploitation and slavery and just absolutely horrific. The articles that I was reading in preparation for this video describing the conditions of these mines is just, it's just absolutely disgusting and horrible, and I cannot imagine living in that environment. It just makes me sick to think about. So that's mica in Madagascar, right? Now let's pivot to palm oil, the most used, if not the most used ingredient in cosmetic products. Because whether or not a product actually has palm oil in the ingredient list or not, palm oil or palm derivative ingredients are typically used as the base for many of the common ingredients that are found within skincare products. So it's extremely common. Palm oil is largely farmed in Malaysia, Malaysia and Indonesia, and has a huge reputation for child labor and forced labor. I would say palm oil exploitation is one of the most documented cases of forced labor that we have today. In addition to the harsh working conditions that are very similar to what I was just describing with mica in Madagascar, palm oil has a huge negative reputation for its devastating environmental impact. In order to farm palm oil in Malaysia and Indonesia, they need to use rainforest land in order to do it. And oftentimes after this land is used for palm oil, it completely destroys the soil and the environment where it's no longer usable to create palm oil, let alone regrow the rainforest conditions that it had before. Obviously, by destroying rainforests, you are completely wiping out thousands of different plants and animal species, putting endangered animals at risk, harming the indigenous groups that rely on those regions for survival, and then obviously it creates absolutely massive greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not even just a problem of forced and unethical labor. Many of the natural ingredients used in skincare products have absolutely horrible environmental impacts, and I won't even deep dive into that in this video because I could make so many videos about that and there's just not enough time. But let me know if you guys do want another deep dive video into that topic, because that's another thing I could just talk for hours and hours about. But yes, palm oil has a major negative reputation for forced, unethical child labor and also just, devastating environmental consequences. Okay, so while this mask is on my skin, I'm actually going to go in with a gua sha, which I haven't used in a long time, but this one is from Sacho Beauty. I like it because it's stainless steel. It doesn't have any pores to soak up the product and just feels nice and cooling on the skin. If you want to support another influencer brand, definitely check out hers. But let's pivot and talk about another common ingredient that I actually have experience working with through the nonprofit organization that I was talking about before. Cacao, or cocoa. Now, cacao is obviously the main ingredient used in chocolate production. If you love chocolate as much as the normal person does, you already know that there's a huge demand for cacao. But the majority of cacao comes from a country called Cote d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast, which is located in West Africa, kind of by Ghana. But if you didn't know, a very common ingredient in skincare and makeup products is cacao butter. A really amazing butter for moisturizing the skin, making it feel soft. But a lot of people don't realize that behind the scenes of cacao production, there is a ton of forced and specifically child labor utilized, specifically on the cacao plantations located in Cote d'Ivoire. This was something I had absolutely no concept of until about 10 years ago, when I had the privilege of being introduced to a man named Seri Kone, one of the most, if not the most inspiring, incredible people I've ever met in my entire life. So Seri was a child raised in Cote d'Ivoire, and I believe when he was like 10, 11, or 12 years old, his parents divorced, which consequently resulted in him being sold to a cacao plantation at 11 years old. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. When he describes the working conditions there, it's about as bad as you can imagine. Working 10-plus-hour days in the intense West African humidity, using machetes to cut down cacao, getting severe injuries from using those machetes, being regularly beaten by plantation operatives for not producing enough cacao or not working fast enough, or for taking breaks. He wasn't able to go to school. He didn't have a family. It's truly just chilling to hear about his story. But I believe it was a few years after working in these conditions when he told his, I don't even know what you would call it, not coworker, another child laborer that was really physically struggling. He told him to take a break and that he would instead work for him, farming twice as much cacao in that time so that his friend could take a break. And when a plantation operative discovered this, he started violently beating this other child. And in that moment, Seri decided to escape. And I believe when he was like 13 or 14 years old, he escaped on his own to the capital of the Ivory Coast. And from there was able to relocate to the USA, get a university education where I met him, start his own nonprofit organization, which I worked for, build a school in Cote d'Ivoire so they could get an education and then be able to, get out so they could experience freedom, and now works with corporate companies to find any instances of child labor that may be in their production lines. Like, his story is absolutely incredible, and as soon as I met him and heard about this, I was like, I will do whatever you want me to do. Let me know how I can help with your nonprofit organization. But the sad reality is that his experience is extremely rare. It's a diamond in the rough. The majority of child laborers who are in their conditions, who knows if they even make it to adulthood, let alone be able to experience freedom at one point in their life. So yes, the cacao industry is yet another example of forced labor and a common ingredient that is utilized in cosmetics. Now that's the issue of forced labor and child labor, which may be new to some of you, or maybe you guys have been familiar with these. Regardless, it's an absolutely massive issue. And I think the most disappointing thing about it is that this type of unethical labor is not isolated to these specific industries. It is in every single ingredient, every single natural source, any type of ingredient or product, depending on the farm or their location. there will be some form of forced or unethical labor. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably sitting there being like, how are they able to get away with this? Like, this is insane. How in 2024 does this still exist? Why hasn't anyone done anything about it? And so now I want to deep dive into how this unethical labor is allowed to continue and the challenges the cosmetics industry faces in awareness of this happening, regulating it happening, and being able to make a change. Okay, now that my face is all gua shot up, I'm gonna rinse this off and continue with the rest of my routine. Whew, okay, I don't know how I feel about that mask. That was really difficult to rinse off, and my skin still feels a little sticky, and I don't know about you, but my skin looks pretty red, so I don't know how effective that was, but we'll see if it changes over the next like 10 minutes or something. So why does this continue to happen? Why haven't we been able to fix this issue of forced and unethical labor? So let's first talk about what happens on the actual ground. Why these laborers are not able to, say, buy their own freedom or get out of the horrible situations that they're in. Plantations and traders can be very, very manipulative, strategic, and just absolutely awful in the way that they not only entrap these people, but also psychologically damage them to ensure that they can't leave. And I think a primary example of this is that from the surface, these people are not initially aware that they are going to be forced laborers. Now, of course, there are the examples of people being abducted, kidnapped, and forced into these situations. But more times what happens is that these jobs are presented to them as an opportunity to be able to make money, where in a lot of these regions, they're very destitute and people don't really have the opportunity to find places to make money. So basically the plantations or traders will say, hey, here's a work opportunity for you. We'll provide you housing and food and payment if you come and work in these mines or farms. You'll be able to work here for 2 years, and then after that, be free to do whatever you want. Sounds like a fine deal, especially if you're really struggling financially, right? What a lot of these individuals don't realize is that the plantations will be charging them for their housing and food, and they will be setting the price at slightly above what they're able to make from working on these farms. So even though they're working all day to make money, the price of housing and food over time creates a bigger and bigger debt that they can't get out of. And because they're working 10, 12, 14, 16-hour days, they don't have opportunities to find other employment. And as they spend more time working, they become more and more trapped because they're building up a debt, and the plantations are not going to let them go so long as they have a debt. But technically, they're not slaves. They're laborers who are being paid. You see what I mean? It's so manipulative and sneaky, and even more horrifying than that, the reason why there tend to be so many child laborers is that adults will be exploited in this way. They work at these farms for, say, 20 years to continue to rack up a higher and higher debt, and if they have children, their children will automatically burden the debt that their parents have, which means every single generation will be trapped in this cycle of exploitative labor. And that's a reason why it is so hard to see when there is instances of forced labor, because oftentimes it doesn't look like the stereotypical image of slavery that we have in our heads, say like what was present in the 1700s, 1800s. It's very disgusting loopholes that they found in order to continue business operations. Now you might be thinking, why aren't the people who are buying these ingredients to use in skincare products checking in and making sure this isn't happening? It is extremely difficult from a top line perspective to ensure that there is no slave labor happening within your production process, because what typically happens is, say, company representatives request to view the sites where these ingredients are coming from, and as soon as these labor camps get notice that people are coming to see it, they automatically hide away all their child laborers. They present working conditions that are much better than what they actually are in reality, and basically put on a show for anyone who might be visiting, so that when the company representatives come back, they're like, yeah, everything looked good. Everyone was being treated fairly, paid fairly. Doesn't look like there's any forced labor to me, and continue business as normal when the reality is very different. So that's how the plantations, farms, and traders are at fault, right? But I'm not going to let you walk away from this video thinking that they're at fault and Western companies are not to blame. Or. I want to talk about the ways that companies are falling short in terms of ensuring that their production line is free of unethical labor. There's a lot of them, baby. Strap in. Okay, now that the Centella is on my skin, which I hope that does a lot better in reducing the redness I was experiencing before, I'm going to go in, what am I going in with? Oh yeah, with the Medicube Super Cica cream. This has a really impressive ingredient list with a bunch of soothing ingredients and I think a gel formula. Actually, I'm not sure. It might be a pretty hydrating cream. I don't know. We'll see. I've just been wanting to test this for a while. So I feel really privileged to be able to talk about this aspect because in creating my own skincare brand, I think one of the most eye-opening things was realizing how just terrible the infrastructure is in terms of transparency of finding out where skincare ingredients come from, how they're sourced, the labor practices. All of it. I feel like I learned so much in creating my own brand and really recognized the ways in which we drastically need to improve our system in order to ensure that this isn't a problem. So let me explain the typical process that skincare founders and brands go through in creating a new formula. So typically a skincare founder will go to a lab and say, hey, what's up, dog? Okay, maybe they don't say that. I want to create a new skincare formula. And the skincare lab says, dope, let's create a beautiful formula for you. What type of consistency do you want? And what do you want the highlight ingredients to be? Basically, the founder will say, I want it to be like a gel moisturizer and I want it to have centella, squalane, and shea butter. And then the lab is like, say no more, we'll come back with a bunch of lab samples for you to be able to test out. And from there, typically, everything else falls on the lab. They present some samples, the founder gives their feedback, and once they find a sample they like, they move forward with the production process. Now, if a brand wants to be extra thorough, they'll typically ask for, one-pagers that give some highlights about the skincare ingredients that the lab is sourcing. And basically, these pages are like single documents that say, this ingredient is from this country, it has these positive benefits for the skin, it's been shown in research to do this and this, and that's about it. And brands will typically take these one-liners that they get from the lab and use them in marketing campaigns. But most of the time, brands don't know any more information about where these ingredients come from beyond what the lab provides. And because this is considered proprietary information or, secret information, the lab isn't going to give up any more information about where these ingredients are sourced from because that's their entire business model. So right away, the skincare founder and brand are completely ignorant about how these ingredients are actually sourced. So it's the lab's fault, right? Well, not necessarily. See, the lab will work with sourcing partners who find these individual ingredients, the farms that they come from, and channel them directly to the lab. And the sourcing partners will, be able to give more information to the lab so they have a good idea about the effectiveness of these ingredients, the safety. But a lot of times, even these sourcing partners don't know about the ground conditions of where these ingredients are coming from. If they're sustainable, if they're sourced ethically, if there's forced labor. A lot of times they don't know. And I am under the personal belief, this is just my opinion, that a lot of sourcing partners operate under this belief of like, don't ask, don't tell, where they're like, tell us about the ingredient, tell us about the benefits, but we don't need to know about the minute sourcing details. We'll take it. And so if there are unethical practices, the companies and brand founders are not aware, the lab isn't aware, a lot of times the sourcing partners are not aware, but everyone is contributing to the problem. And so you can see how complicated it is and why it's so difficult for transparency to be present in sourcing ingredients. And when I first started creating my products, that was what blew me away the most. And that's why I was so strict about picking every single ingredient supplier myself, reading pages and pages and pages and pages, and as much detail about where these ingredients come from and how they're sourced. And in addition to that, what we did with Selfless is that we sent them a set of questions and standards that they had to adhere to in order to work with us. And it was a very simple list that requested them to outline the working conditions of the people on their farm, the payment details, the environmental impact and contributions to those regions that they're making in order to ensure that there was environmental protections. Basically all the stuff that I'm detailing in this video. And you want to know what's absolutely insane? Nearly every single ingredient supplier that we went to, and consider, a lot of these suppliers have huge clients, some of the biggest cosmetic companies in the world, they came back to us kind of confused and said, we've never been asked questions like this before. Like, why do you guys want to know about this? Nobody's ever asked us about the working conditions or the environmental conditions. Are you kidding me? My mind was so blown. I was like, how is my little ass skincare brand the first brand to create checks and balances to ensure that none of this is happening? Like, does anyone care? Is anyone even trying? And I'm not saying that to make myself or my brand look better than anyone else at all. Like I said before, a lot of brands don't have the opportunity to deep dive into the ingredients that they're using because they are sourced through the lab. But I mean, still, bro, like what? So as you can see, there's just a huge lack of awareness, transparency, and efforts being made to ensure where the hell these ingredients are even coming from in the first place. Oh, sorry, I got so fired up talking about this because this was the most mind-blowing aspect of creating my brand. Like, you thought I was most blown away by the retinol serum? Nor. It was all of this, and it definitely opened my eyes to how much work the cosmetics industry needs to do and just how far we still have to go in eradicating the problem of unethical labor. And not even just unethical labor. Like I said before, I'm not even touching on the sustainability aspects, community enrichment, regional protections. Like, it's just insane. Okay, so actually this moisturizer was pretty nice and lightweight. I mean, I'd still say it's like a little bit thick for my taste, but lighter than I expected. However, I do want to ensure that my cheeks have enough moisture and hydration, so I'm gonna go in with the Good Light Order of the Eclipse Hyaluronic Cream. If you're not familiar with Good Light, my friend founded this brand. It's amazing. Such good formulas. I absolutely love the Cosmic Dew Cleanser, but I don't know if I've used this one, so we'll see how it is. Okay, I just want to say, I'm so sorry that this is going on for a long time. This is a topic I'm very passionate about, and like I said, I could talk about for days and days. I am barely skimming the surface of these topics, but y'all asked for this. This is one of my most requested videos, so you better enjoy it, bitch. But I promise, we're getting close to the end. Well, are we? I'm like halfway through my document I built out for this. Okay, now that the moisturizer is on, I'm gonna go in with an eye cream, and this is a brand that I really have not used on my channel at all, typically because it tends to be like a little higher price than I prefer, but the ingredients of this look really interesting, and I've always wanted to try products from them, but this is the Strivectin Tighten and Lift Peptide 360 Tightening Eye Serum. My dark circles have been coming out to play, and I desperately need to take care of them, so I'm interested to see how this one works, and I do kind of like the applicator. Definitely better than the Papa Tui eye cream. If you guys watched my review, you know what happened. So another aspect of how companies are at fault, which I'll lightly touch on, is the way that they get around labor laws in order to continue selling products that have a known presence of forced labor. So it depends on the country, but for the USA specifically, there are certain regions and zones around the world that have been banned in the USA for selling products out of because of the presence of slave labor. Basically, the US is like, if a product is from this region, then it's not allowed to be sold in the USA. But so many companies are, of course, sneaky, and basically what they do is that only specific ingredients or specific components of a product will be mined, farmed, or produced in those specific regions that have the presence of forced labor, and then are shipped to manufacturing facilities in areas that are permitted by the US to then be put in the final product and then sold in the USA. For example, like mica. Mica is farmed in Madagascar, but then it's shipped to China where it's processed and formulated into products that are then shipped to the USA and sold on our markets. So basically these companies are able to say, well, technically we're not using products from those regions, so we're allowed to sell in the US, or even these products will be sold online and not sold in physical US locations, which means they can basically be from anywhere. And I would say the biggest culprits of this, well, at least the most obvious culprits of this, are like Temu and Shein. They are notorious for using this strategy to get around strict US labor laws, and there's not really a lot we can do on our end from a legislative perspective because it's extremely difficult to track down where every single company is sourcing every single component and ingredient from. So it's just another sneaky way that companies are able to get around any of our legislative efforts to try and control slave labor in the production process. Super frustrating, right? And I assume if you're already watching this video, you know this, but please, if you walk away from this video with anything, please don't shop from Temu or Shein. They are terrible companies that are basically the poster child for exploitative labor. Yeah, just awful. Now, another issue contributing to this problem actually does have responsibility that falls on the consumer, but I'll explain what I mean, because I'm a firm believer that consumers at large are not to blame for the large-scale problem of forced and unethical labor. The true cost of affordability. We are in an era where products, more so than ever before, are becoming more and more and more affordable. And I know it doesn't seem like it because the economy is just terrible, but I mean, think about it. 30 years ago, were we able to get like $2 shirts from Shein, 50-cent skincare products from Temu? These type of products have always been more expensive, and it's only really been within the last like 10 to 15 years that we've seen this new era of just extremely affordable products. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because as the economy gets worse, people demand and expect products to become more and more and more affordable in order to help us survive the economy. But at the same time, we as consumers kind of have an expectations that corporations are doing their due diligence to ensure that their products are made ethically and sustainably, which, newsflash, I'm sure you had no idea, but Corporations don't. So let's take cacao, for example. Chocolate has always been a luxury good. It has never been cheap to make. It's one of the most expensive food products out there, but as interest in chocolate has grown, corporations have pushed for their products to be more and more affordable, which means they put pressure on traders and farms to be able to supply them with ingredients at a lower and lower cost. So this demand trickles all the way down to the individual farms, and farmers and traders are basically pushed into a corner where they're like, well, we have these huge orders, we have this crazy demand, but we're also being pushed to sell it to them at a lower price. What are we going to do? And unfortunately, the common solution is to use forced labor practices rather than ethically paying laborers. And it's so frustrating because this issue should be a concern amongst the top people at companies. But the way that it works is that they're essentially pushing the responsibility all the way down the line until the farmers and the traders have to take the heat for it. Corporations don't want to acknowledge that these ingredients cannot be supplied to them at the cost that they're requesting. Cosmetic and skincare brands are actively always looking for how they can find ingredients at a lower and lower price. And with the farmers and traders being pushed into a corner, guess who gets the short end of the stick? The actual laborers themselves. Because these farms or suppliers say, no, we can't sell it to you at this price, you have to pay more. Corporations basically say, okay, well, we're going to dip out. It was nice working with you. We're going to meet a company who can meet our requests. And then the farms are all racing to work with these big clients because it's better to have a big client than no clients. So you see what I mean, how they're pushed into forced labor, but it's not necessarily their own fault. It's really the fault of corporations who decide to turn a blind eye to how these ingredients are being made. And, you know, a little bit of the responsibility is on us as consumers because we're actively pushing for more and more affordable products at an unrealistic price. But of course, the majority of us are not aware that this is a problem, so we're not going to change our requests. And I personally believe that if the majority of consumers knew that the lower prices they're pushing for is equating to utilizing slave labor, I want to believe in the good of humanity that we would not be okay with that, and we're okay with paying higher prices for these products in order to ensure that they're ethically made. Call me crazy, but I do believe that people want that. But you know what's so frustrating about all of this? While the demand for lower prices goes down and the budgets go down, guess whose profits are protected? Of course, the large-scale corporations and their leaders who are making billions of dollars in revenue. Yeah, it's so frustrating. Okay, so next, because it is still daytime, I am going to go in with a sunscreen for my ears and the back of my neck. This is one from Tokobo. It's the Cotton Soft Sun Stick. It's a Korean sunscreen that I have not used before, but y'all know I've been really into the sunstick game. Now, some of you guys who might be familiar with this problem might be asking, well, Hyram, why don't we just purchase fair trade products? And if you don't know what fair trade is, it's basically a certification that companies can use to ensure that no forced or unethical labor practices were utilized in their production line. And I used to be like a huge fan of fair trade, and I still do think it's good. Like, it's a really good effort to, you know, find companies that are operating more ethically. But the issue is that fair trade is just not enough. And a bunch of research and studies have been done on fair trade products to find if they're actually more ethical, and the results really aren't there. Fair trade products often carry like a higher price point to them, which is understandable, you know. It costs a lot of money to operate fairly. But the issue is that the additional amount that you're spending on products rarely trickles down to the farmers and traders themselves. And there's basically like a complete lack of monitoring present, which means that there's really no checks and balances to ensure that they're doing what they're saying. So it's just extremely difficult to ensure that that extra funding is going all the way down the chain. So now that we know all of this, what is the solution? Like, what's the answer? I'm sure if you've watched this far, you now understand how complicated of an issue this is and how it's not just as simple as saying to corporations, be better, and they fix it all. Okay, so next I'm gonna go in with one of my newer favorite sunscreens. It's the Numbuzin Calming Water Sunscreen. It's another Korean sunscreen, of course. I love this one because it's such a lightweight gel on the face that does not feel heavy at all. So in my process of working with a nonprofit organization, really taking time to understand this, building my own brand, and discovering all the problems down the chain when it comes to creating cosmetic products, I basically come to the conclusion that in order to be 100% ethical, we basically have to create an entirely new system to operate under, which basically shows that the current capitalistic system that we use to create and sell products is problematic in and of itself. And the issue is that companies who overlook these checks and balances, who don't make an effort to actually operate ethically, are guaranteed significantly more success than companies that are actually putting parameters in place to solve these issues. Not only because of the cost of labor itself, but also in just creating an entirely new system to operate under. For example, with Selfless, I recognized that if I was going to be creating products, I did not want them to be contributing to these problems. And so the way that we set up Selfless was with the Selfless standard, a set of guidelines and rules that each of our ingredient suppliers and partners had to operate under in order to work with us that best ensured the ingredients we're using are as ethical as possible. And it's by no means a perfect system, but it's the best we can do to fight this problem that our economy is basically wired to perpetrate. But even with that in mind, I want to share the things I think we can do to make a huge difference and really create a lot of progress to down the road be able to eradicate unethical and forced labor from the cosmetics industry, but also just any industry at all. I think first and foremost, an important thing to recognize is that no one person is at fault. Although I will say large-scale greedy corporations are mostly at fault, but still, no one group, company, or person is responsible for this entire problem. But the changes I think we need to make are first, legislation. Our economic and political systems reward greed and maximizing profits as much as possible more than anything else. Ethical operations, transparency, and good efforts are swept under the rug in favor of creating the biggest profits possible. And I think if we can introduce more legislation to regulate this so that companies who do operate the most unethically are not rewarded with the most business opportunities, that's a really good place to start. I also think there needs to be more checks and balances all the way to the ground level when it comes to transparent sourcing. I don't think you should be able to make a cosmetic product without even knowing where the ingredient comes from, how it was sourced. I think there needs to be more transparency from the labs, from the suppliers, from the traders, and from the brands, from the farms, all the way up to the founders, and that should just be the expectation when it comes to creating products and a brand in the first place. I think from a business side, there needs to be a higher demand for ethically sourced ingredients. I don't think that brands should be able to be like, give me the cheapest ingredient out there. As long as it's the least expensive, we're good to go. I think brands and brand owners should, from the very beginning of working with suppliers, demand that they're getting ethically sourced ingredients and ask for proof of that. I think that can make a huge difference because as soon as suppliers start seeing that the majority of companies are asking for proof and demanding it, they're going to be whipped into shape, you know? And on the consumer side, I definitely think there needs to be a cultural shift in the price points that we expect from products. I think we need to put our efforts into rewarding ethically sourced and just ethically minded companies and stop rewarding greedy large-scale corporations. And it's not fun, it's not easy, it'll come with a higher price point, it'll mean more product research on our end, it will be less convenient, but that's really what we need to do. And then finally, talking about it. I think the more we talk about this issue and the more people realize that this is a problem, the more pressure we can put on companies to start changing the way that they operate. At the end of the day, corporations and companies are chasing money. They will go where the money goes. And if we can channel our money towards companies that are making an actual change, larger companies will want to do that as well. They'll want to make a change. And I just want to say as well, hearing about all of this may be very disappointing. I know in the years that I've researched this, it's definitely demoralizing and it's very easy to be like, well, we're fucked. The world's shit. There's nothing we can do. But major systemic change like this is a slow burn. It happens slowly over time. And the more and more we can introduce even just small changes, they'll create a domino effect that can definitely lead to companies eradicating forced and unethical labor from their business practices down the road. This isn't something that we're going to be able to change overnight, but I truly do believe that we have the impact and the power to be able to enact major change that can leave forced labor and unethical practices in the dust. We just have to talk about it. We have to make noise. We have to be angry. And when companies and corporations start to see that, they'll be forced to make a change because that's where the money will be. Obviously, there are so many more changes that need to be made, but these are just kind of like the top ones that I think could make the biggest and fastest change. Oh my gosh, this was so long, so complicated. I really hope your head isn't spinning too much, but I really want to hear from you guys what your feedback is. Did you know about all of this? Did you realize this was a problem? What do you think would be a good solution? Or how do you disagree with me in terms of how we can address this? I would absolutely love to hear from you guys because this is something that I'm always thinking about, that I'm so passionate about, and a lot of these solutions have been implemented in my own skincare brand, and we're always looking to improve too, so I would love to hear from you guys. At the end of the day, day, there's no perfect solution. There's no perfect brand. In the current system that we're in, it is impossible to be 100% ethical. But the most important thing is that we're improving. And I think that we as consumers can have a major voice and impact in making that happen. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know this was like my most requested video, and I hope it measured up to what you guys were expecting. I apologize if it didn't, but if you guys are interested in hearing more kinds of videos like this, I could deep dive into sustainability aspects of the cosmetics industry, the deceptive marketing tactics. I could delve into other industries. Like, I could talk about so much of this, but only if you guys are interested, so let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said before, all the products that I used in today's video will be linked down below, and if you are wanting to support a brand that is making major ethics to be as ethical as possible in the production line, definitely check out my skincare brand Selfless by Hyram, which is available in-store at Target. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that you can see my videos every single week, and I will see you guys in the next one. Mwah.